So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you may be. Allow me to set the scene for this webinar, please. It is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, then I suggest you leave right now. We've done a few of these from experience, certainly for the panelists. We love these things to be interactive. So if you're presentable, and even if you're in your jammies or your cosplay outfits, then we would love it if you would come on camera, please. Otherwise, it ends up more of a lecture and less of an interaction. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, we'd appreciate it. Just to let you know, there is no sales pitch here. This is purely informational and hopefully insightful, because we love to share these things. We do have essential knowledge that we think would be useful for the wider public, so that's why we do this. And we try to have a bit of fun with it because, you know, technology and security and stuff can be a little dry. So the topic for today is lessons learned from smart cities. And we're going to throw in a few lessons that we learned from the conference that we went to last week as well, because we'll start there in a second, because we think that's quite a relevant setup. So company introductions then. Here we have a partnership between ourselves at Stealth-ISS and Sprout Group. Sprout, and I'll let Travis speak to this in a second, but Sprout, you know, MSPs and MSSPs together form, you know, deliver kind of superpowers. We join our superpowers together. So Travis's company builds and operates the stuff that companies run on, and then we provide a wrapper of security around that just to make sure everyone's safe and stuff doesn't get hacked or fail. So my name's Rob. I'm the CEO here at Stealth. Over to you, Travis. Give us an introduction.
Thanks so much, Rob. So I'm Travis Woods with Sprout Technology Group. And we're a company, as Rob mentioned, that does managed services, but also staff augmentation and resale for the state, local government sector. So it's a pleasure to be here. My background, I've been managing IT services, providing IT services for about the last 15 years or so. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So glad to team up with the good folks at Stealth. So thank you, Rob. Dasha.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you. So Dasha is our other panelist today, and I'll be dipping in and out of the panel, especially with the easy questions. So Dasha, over to you. Give us a brief bio and tell us why you're here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Dasha Deckwerth. I'm the CISO and president of Stealth Group. Been in cybersecurity for probably over 25 years now. That's what I do, and I worked on several smart city projects before and related smart city projects, so definitely glad to be here to share some information and stories.
Great, so thank you for that. I'm admitting, folks, it's we're quite popular today. So just for everyone's benefit, if you do have any questions as we go, feel free to pop them in the chat. If we don't answer them today, if we don't get to them, because there's going to be a lot of stuff going on today, then we promise we will respond to you and everyone, so everyone will see an answer to all of the questions. Okay, so without further ado then, question one. Let's set the scene a little bit. Travis, what were your key learnings from the Smart Cities conference in Denver last week?
Yeah. So first of all, I felt like the conference was absolutely fascinating. Like it was such an interesting take on all of the things that we've seen in the environment that you think you know what they are. So the cameras in the intersections. You know, now I've got a much better understanding of why they're there and such, but for the most part, what's incredible is that with IoT and sensors, cameras, all of these internet connected devices are exploding throughout our cities and the landscapes, and they're all generating so much information And in some cases, that information is really well managed and it's all coming together. And in some cases, there are just still these silos. And so that sounds like a real problem that needs to be addressed going forward in the smart city architecture. So that was a big takeaway for me.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Dasha, what did you pick up that you didn't know already?
I think one of the biggest issues that I realized is how far behind the US actually is in this topic related to the Middle East and Asia. And not so much technology, probably maybe more on the budget side, but also politics. It is, I guess politics does play a big role here, where the cities are trying to move forward, but then they get stopped because health and safety and data privacy, and somebody else has a different agenda. So it does not seem to be going as quickly forward as in other countries. And then it's pockets of POCs that are being rolled out versus we're going to create a smart city and move forward. So those are the biggest takeaways for me.
Awesome. I've got a few actually. So let me please share mine, because I tend not to take notes at things, but I have a notebook full of stuff and I'd love to share it. So to summary for me, smart cities are a patchwork quilt joined by data. That's
absolutely apt, Rob. Yeah, fantastic analogy there.
That was my main takeaway. So it's about partnerships, it's about connectivity, it's about ecosystems. To Dasha's point, the approach seems to be quite considered, with small, starting with small POCs and then using those to build momentum, to then build kind of 3P partnerships. Automation is key. The data, clearly, everything's joined by the data. People matter. We're all technologists, and we go on about technology all day long, but it really is about the people. It's about simplicity. There are resource constraints. There is a lack of standards that joins this patchwork together. It's joined by data, but the data standards do not exist. What else did I get? The biggest challenge is not technology, it's bureaucracy, to Dasha's point. And then a couple of key things, a couple of sound bites that I heard that I noted down, and I'm going to use these forever. One, data rich, insight poor, kind of speaks to that connectivity of data and how that it's perhaps not being used to its best advantage. And then really it's about de-risking the future. Yes, we can all sit in our siloed ivory towers when it comes to technology, but what about the risk to the future? So that's what I learned. It was a fascinating event. By the way, it's a special shout out to Jim on the call here. He chaired our panel and was just a fabulous host for us. So thank you, Jim. Totally appreciated. And we've stolen your questions, and we're going to use that to play back here. So I'm going to throw this one at Dasha to start off with. Dasha, give us an example of a fun engagement around smart cities. And then from there, we'll get into perhaps a question about dealing with the data aspect of that.
Okay. So one thing is probably, it's not necessarily a smart city per se, but it ties in with a smart city. And it was actually a commercial project here in the US. And it was a very large company that has a lot of agriculture, tractors, machinery, and they started transitioning into the smart city and smart environment area. So they literally transformed their machineries to be smart machineries with a whole bunch of sensors that were collecting weather information, that was helping the farmers to actually understand what kind of seed they had to get based on the soil, how to actually take advantage of all the different sensors from the type of seed, the soil, the weather, and tying that into the supply chain of purchasing, logistics, harvesting, and what kind of crop to get all of these into making the cities and making the environment really more sustainable, getting more out of it, and being able to just commercially be more viable and make more and harvest more. So it's not smart city related, but I think it was very fascinating because I never thought that this would kind of tie in with, you know, the sustainability into the environmental factors and how that could be impacting businesses itself to tie into this whole smart city movement. So that was very exciting because that was eye-opening, and just the thought about having a stupid machine, a tractor, a harvester, having suddenly being transitioned into being the smart device, and how many sensors it actually took to get to that point, and what kind of data it collected, and how it needed to really communicate with so many things, analyze the data, and be able to give the right information to the farmers to be able to take the right actions. And that was just fascinating.
Dasha, that's a great example. I mean, that, you know, that's talking about a tractor. I mean, we can play that out into looking at just an intersection, you know, and how many sensors it now takes to create a smart intersection where, you know, we can optimize the traffic for pedestrians. We can optimize it for, you know, for vehicles. I mean, we can even optimize with this technology, an intersection to lower its carbon footprint. So you're right, the application of cameras, sensors, all of these things that are being hung onto the network is exploding, and with that there has to be some governance and you know, some planning around what we're putting on the network, access controls to that, and also the maintenance of that, let alone the data that those things are generating. So
Fantastic. Thanks, Travis. Dasha, I know that you have an example. You know, I would disagree with you. I think the example you gave is 100% correlated with part of the patchwork of smart cities. So it is totally relevant. Give us an example of some work in the Middle East. I'm thinking of the example around the cameras, and then how the data was handled and what you learned from that, and how the project changed over time.
Okay. So yeah, that was a project that actually here, two of so Tom, who is here on the panel, and also Joe, who we worked on this. So this was actually a camera system for Abu Dhabi. It was really about first traffic management. And then it was about license plate recognition, and eventually ended up going into shopping centers, facial recognitions. And it had different areas. So obviously the police was involved as the end user of it, to be able to track crime and be able to solve crimes. Of course, traffic management was a big thing. And then also it was about national security. So the Ministry of Interior was also one of the clients that actually used the data to be able to protect the borders, you know, to the different to the different countries, but at the same time also the sea border. And there were various different sensors around it. And I think I'm going to pass this one over to Tom, because he was the engineer on this, so he can probably give a lot more insight on how all this actually was pieced together.
Hi. Yes, I'd like to do that. I'd like to just give you an example of an event that occurred, real life event. There was a murder actually in the building in which I lived, which also happened to be the same building where we worked. A lady was killed in the toilets by somebody, and at the beginning of it, they didn't have any idea why. The police had actually not been particularly interested in the Falcon Eye project, but they thought it might be useful for this, so they got us involved. They actually managed to catch the woman coming because of the cameras that were inside the shopping centre to catch the woman coming out that had committed the murder, coming out of the toilets. And there'd only been 2 women in there at that point in time. They managed to follow her till she got into a taxi. They managed, using the LPRs and the cameras combined, to be able to follow that taxi until the woman got out of it and then got into another taxi, which they then followed. And to cut a rather long story short, using the cameras, using the LPRs, they were able to actually follow where she actually went to, into the building. They managed to capture her and her the person who sort of trained her to do this job, who was basically a cold terrorist. And they did all that in 25 minutes, which is a remarkable event.
Wow.
After that, the police were very interested. So I think it is very, very important that all people are, that are going to get involved in a safe city need to be involved very early, need to have their needs identified at a very early stage, and then schedule how those are going to be built into the system. You can't do it all at once. Safe cities take a little while to build. So you have to have that schedule of events that satisfy the needs in a gradual sense across all the people who are going to benefit from that.
So Tom, in other words, you have to literally start with the end in mind. Where do you want to go? What do you want to, who is your target audience? What is their use case for that? Because using your example, if we would have known from the beginning the police is going to use it, these are going to be the use cases, we would have been able to design it from, okay, we're going to need cameras. These are the areas, regional areas or city areas where crime happens or that are relevant to capture maybe more data than in others that are safer, you know, and being able to interconnect the traffic and cameras managing the traffic with facial recognition, with maybe dispatch, you know, sending notification out to the local police that were right there when it happened or where that lady was going. So I think having a use case, knowing, understanding where it needs to go, what you want to achieve with a smart city is I think the key starting point.
It is and this is where it is very important to get the safe city or smart city architect involved at a very early stage to actually start building those use cases and make sure that, again, that it's integrated in a fashion so that you start building sectors where everything works and build out from that, rather than put in all your cameras, put in all your LPRs, put in all the monitoring stations, put in all the operator stations, because the operator stations for the police didn't actually get integrated into the system until after that event. So, Dasha, you make a very strong point there.
Yeah, it's an evolution, isn't it? As folks recognize the usefulness of what's being delivered, then all of a sudden you build this groundswell of interest, and then, you know, key stakeholders start to get involved. This does raise an interesting question in the difference between what we would call a benevolent dictatorship in the Middle East and trying to make progress in the US. So I'm going to and by the way, Tom, I owe an apology. I did not introduce you at the start of this call. My sincerest apologies. Tom was chief engineer of Abu Dhabi and Azerbaijan and other smart cities. So apologies for that. So the kind of the political question then, or the kind of governance question, who would like to take that one on? Just observations between US and rest of the world.
I'm going to give it a go. So, I mean, in the US in general, and Europe in general, data privacy is a big thing. Everything that we collect, especially when it comes around facial recognition, monitoring, tracking people, collecting biometrics, whatever it is a big concern here, and Europe as well. In other countries, Middle East, Asia, they got a little bit different policies, requirements. There, it varies from country to country. And I think one of the reasons here in the US is also privacy. It's pushing this forward. It's you have to get buy-in, or I believe the cities are also struggling with getting buy-ins from the people. Because if you're building a smart city, you've got the end client that's going to use it, the different departments. But then as you roll it out, you kind of, with projects and cities, you have to get the buy-in from the people. They probably will have a pushback because everything is being tracked, everything is being monitored, especially since this is in many countries, as a user, you will have, or as a citizen, you can vote and you get involved in the process of what is being built, what is being not built. And there seems to be a concern about that, which is understandable. I think, especially since this is all about data and we're collecting so much information, the question comes about, how is the data being used? Who all has access to it? How is it being analyzed? And what are the use cases? Specifically in the US, racial profiling, that already has been in the news. You collect data, how is it being used? Are you profiling? Are you using it for marketing purposes? Are you, what are you going to do with it? And at the same time, as you collect data, is how accurate is the data? Is it correct? Or has somebody tampered with it, accidentally or on purpose? And if that is the case, how valuable is the information? Are you suddenly going to accuse somebody else to doing something or committing a crime because somebody tampered with the data, you didn't get the right results? So it is a very big concern, especially if data is being hosted centrally, collected centrally, and analyzed or shared with other agencies where you got the interconnection and the communication between different systems. And I believe that can pose a huge risk to data in general, not just privacy, but in general, traffic systems. If somebody tampers with data in a system that has not been secured properly, or you did not have any file monitoring or integrity solutions around your data, then suddenly you're going to get what is a stop sign. Suddenly the AI system or the analytics are going to interpret it as it's a person, and it's going to be a complete different result in what the smart city is going to do with it. So it's a huge risk, in my opinion.
I
Yeah,
think
Dasha.
if
Go
I
ahead,
may,
Paul.
I think this leads us on to legislation, which is one aspect, but that will be very slow, whatever we do. But it does bring us on to standardization, or at least recommendations that all safe cities should include in their structure, in their architecture, and in their operations. And those standards in place, then I think it would be much easier to legislation that would be appropriate rather than being restrictive. And I think we in the industry need to start looking at that at a very early stage.
Yeah, to that point, Tom, like there are what I heard is a lot of cities have, IT managers, folks that are don't have the they're chief information officers and CISOs, but I feel like there could be there is a deficiency in the planning aspects of these projects that that don't look at the don't look at the management and the governance of the data and the information that goes on. So I think that was one of the things that I didn't hear enough about at the conference. So I'd like to see a little bit more on that.
Great. So you guys answered a question before I even asked it, which was about advice on dealing with explosive volumes of data. And any other observations before we pivot slightly? Just around, sheer volume. It's not. Yeah, there's a lack of standards, and also there's a question around integrity. But Travis, I was actually going to throw this to you from a kind of MSP perspective, and just the horsepower and the just sheer storage requirements. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, again, we're seeing so much data being generated by all of these different devices. Where there are a couple ways to approach that. The systems that are being built are either being, depending on what type of data we're processing, things like that. We'll see an explosion of information and processing at the edge to help curb some of that information and anonymize it. Again, applying those protections. So I think seeing cities get more of that type of information at the edge happening is definitely going to be a big thing.
Perfect. I think Dasha has an example around cameras in Abu Dhabi and how the architecture was altered because of the data. So Dasha, I hope I haven't teed that up incorrectly for you.
No, I think one of the biggest areas that I was involved in, of course, was storage and disaster recovery. And I know one of the things that we continuously had to address was the capacity, the storage. It's it's so many sensors, and we were constantly rolling out more cameras, more sensors across the city. So there's this sheer volume, and then also the thing around it is, how long can you actually store it? How long do you need to store it? And those are the things that I think a lot of cities will have to address, because storage, even though it is getting cheaper and cheaper, you still need the hardware. You still need to buy it. You still need to grow it. And if we take a look at some of the privacy laws, and this goes back to standardization and the legislations around it, is how long can you actually keep it? And in some cases, if you have a crime or something that needs to be kept for longer than the usual amount, let's say your standard is 6 months because you know, what else do you need? But then you have a traffic incident or a crime, and that might go to court. So you will have to keep the video, you will have to keep the data, you may have to give it to the insurance agencies for analysis. And that is, I think, one of the biggest things, extrapolating that data, putting it somewhere else. You're going to have a long-term archive storage. So all of these things that need to be considered in the design phase and not necessarily afterwards, because that will completely mess with your budget and your design in general.
Okay,
Can I add something to that, please?
Sure.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, the data size, and of course the fact that you need to make sure you've got security on that, which may mean that you have dual data centers, which is certainly something we did in Abu Dhabi. But the other problem that you have as you add more and more sensors into the system is the sheer data rate that you need to support. And when you have two data centers, the amount of data traveling between those data centers becomes huge. And in fact, it did catch us out in Abu Dhabi, and we eventually had to increase the speed. But the cost of relaying more fiber gets very, very expensive. And one of the ways we worked around that was to use DWDM as a process, which took us from 40 gig to 400 gig down the same fibers. But you have to, again, it comes back to the architecture. The architecture says how much storage you're going to need, and the number of fibers and sort of technology you need in each different segment of the city, and it will change depending on the type of segment that you're looking at.
Right. So forward planning, and then given that a lot of these items are expensive, you know, we can disappear down the rabbit hole of 3P partnerships and that type of thing. But I wanted to just stick with the data for a second, because I think there's a growing question in the world just in general, which is, you know, edge versus cloud. Now, the example I was thinking of, and I heard it at the conference, was where traffic cameras were individually sending video data back to a centralized point. And there was just overwhelm of data. So the decision was made to put in, if you like, hubs or smart devices on the edge to receive that video feed and then analyze it and turn it into just insight and not video back to the control center, such that, you know, the cameras would recognize traffic and how long lights were red for or what have you. And that was, you know, every 10 cameras there was a hub that took that data and then sent the relevant telemetry, if you like, the metadata back to the center. So Dasha, was that something that happened in Abu Dhabi?
I believe we had some of those, but I think now, especially, I mean, this project is Abu Dhabi was a few years back. With today's technology, things have changed a little bit, and I think I take the analogy of IT in today is you have the central collectors, you have the central brains. For example, antivirus. If you're an enterprise, you have a central antivirus that manages things, that identifies the alerts and only sends the alerts or the relevant data to the SIM or to the central console for the IT or security team to manage. And especially now that we are a few years advanced and more technology has come out into play, you've got the smart city sensors that you can literally put maybe 10, 15 cameras together in a cluster to collect and analyze the data, or each camera has their own analytics and then pushes only the relevant data out instead of the video. So, but it also comes then back to, you know, how much money do you have and how much infrastructure do you actually have? Because if you're doing a smart city somewhere in the middle of the jungle, kind of literally, you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the amount of energy or a power to use. How much can you actually compute at the very end, at the very device? Is it worth computing it at the edge or sending all of the data and having it computed centrally? So those, I think, are really some of the design questions that you have to take into consideration. Where am I building this? What part of the city is it? And then also the other thing is, in some areas, you may just not have the ability to have that smart device in the city itself. It may be damaged. It may get damaged. You may have a really huge crime rate and you will have to protect it so it does not get stolen, does not get vandalized. So, you know, those are all the different things you really have to consider. Where is your compute really going to be? Is it going to be at the edge or is it going to be central?
Awesome. So we've kind of touched on this, and I would encourage folks, if you have a question, please just pop it in the chat. We do have one that I'm going to get to in a second. We've kind of skirted around the edges of this, but how do you de-risk a project at the front end?
I think that's a Tom question.
That's the Tom.
Yeah.
I had a feeling it was coming in my direction. The most important thing is to actually involve all the major authorities that are going to be involved in this. That means talking to the city IT experts. That is talking to the city engineer, chief engineer for the city. There will be one. That means involving the police and any other law enforcement agencies that may be related to that city. It means involving the fire brigade. It means involving the hospitals and the ambulance service. I mean, you think I'm going out. I'm not. These are all people who will be directly affected by the way that we build our safe city. An example, for instance, for the ambulances is something that was done in Azerbaijan, where we created a smart green wave, so that certain vehicles could be given a free run to wherever they were going. But you can't do that for everyone. So you need to do that with a lot of intelligence. You need to decide how you're going to do that beforehand. That's just an example of how you have to involve everybody to be able to do that. And so you can't go in to do a smart city and start building on day one. You need to have those interactions with all the major players, with all the people who are going to be affected, and listen to the public reaction, because you want to make this public that you're doing it, and you want to listen to that and be able to manage the story so that it doesn't immediately cause people to be frightened, because a lot of people are frightened by the idea of massive amount of data which could involve them, could include them. How is that going to be protected? They need to be informed of that. All that needs to happen before you actually start breaking ground. In the United States, certainly. In Europe, certainly. Perhaps in other parts of the world, it wouldn't be so necessary. But certainly in an open democracy like the United States, like Europe, even the UK, it is essential.
Okay, so even though it is a patchwork quilt, there needs to be a strong consideration for what the end quilt will look like before you start stitching the pieces together and start building those, I think is what I'm hearing. So fabulous. So we let me segue into a question from Sayed. What's your opinion on the role of smart cities in enhancing accessibility for individuals with disabilities? How can this technology effectively assist them, and what potential does it hold for the future in terms of enhancing accessibility, inclusivity, and overall quality of life for disabled individuals? What a fabulous question. I appreciate that one. Thank you. So I'm looking for volunteers. Who would like to take that one on?
Well,
I will give a very quick start, and then I shall leave it to Dasha.
Okay.
One of the things that's going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years is the increase in automated vehicles. And these will particularly, I think, take the form of public transport, which is automated. And I don't think it's going to be big buses anymore. I think it's going to be relatively small vehicles. And therefore, you're going to have a set of those vehicles which are for able-bodied people, but you're going to need some special ones for the people with problems in mobility. And therefore, you're going to need to plan how those and direct how those are going to be integrated around the city, how they're going to be made available in the city. That's one of the visions that I see. One of the great advantages of a smart city in the future is that people who have transport problems, who have disabilities, can be given much more mobility in a way that suits them, using the technology to distribute that capability. Dasha, I leave it to you now.
Very good point. The other opportunity I see is, for example, you will have, and in some cities you already have, drones, deliveries, all of these things that will, even though you will have the transportation out there that you just mentioned, Tom, but there will be ways to literally order something, have it delivered via drone or a robot, you name it, to your home. The disabled probably will have some kind of, I mean, it already exists, some kind of device that can communicate, and where the doctor will be able to monitor their health or whatever status from remote. You will be able to, order your medicine, or a doctor will be able to get your stuff directly ordered as it goes. So I think there's loads of opportunities, not necessarily just around accessibility, mobility, but also for example, cities are already implementing, and I've seen it in Asia and Middle East, all the citizen services, renewing driver's license, getting paperwork done, instead of going into the office, having to do it in person, sign a paper, sign up for utilities, all of these things can now be done electronically. You can do it online. All of this is being integrated, just make it easier. And to keep people out of the cities, out of the central cities where usually they are congested anyways. So this is not so much necessarily for the ones with disabilities, for general, it just is going to make things a lot easier. And having the technology integrated, you will be able to, technology will be able to read it out loud for you. If you have visual problems, you will be able to do it online, not having to interact with a person. So I think this is just a very great opportunity. The question really becomes to what are the priorities that the cities will have.
I think also this is an opportunity for, because we're capturing so much data throughout the city, we're going to know a lot more about our citizenry, and not, in a creepy, privacy way, but in a way that we know, like, how are people interacting with the landscape? And I think, enhancements in AI, and better sharing across data pools will help to provide these insights that identify problems, that identify neighborhoods where, perhaps parks aren't being utilized as much, or that there's an accessibility problem in a particular area. So I think, like I said, the data is going to reveal some of these things that we haven't been able to see in the past, unless you lived in that city or in that specific neighborhood or on that specific block. So
right, fabulous answers, guys. I wanted to you kind of touched on the gorilla in the room, which for me is data privacy. We do have a question related to that. How did you get buy-in? Okay, so for Abu Dhabi, the answer to the buy-in question is it's a benevolent dictatorship, and the citizens didn't necessarily have a say. They were just recipients of a smart city one day. But how, in the US, how do you suggest we get buy-in from citizens? The question mentions cameras and citizen tracking, but wider than that, the volumes of data we've been discussing, some of which is people related. How do we reassure the population that their data is being appropriately secured? And as I say, it's very much a data privacy question.
I think I'm gonna give it a start. So one thing I learned during the event, there was actually a session where somebody was talking. Actually, the smart city manager of Las Vegas, and I live in Vegas, and we all know there's lots of cameras in the casino, so you're being tracked. But what I was really surprised about is that Las Vegas itself has a lot of initiatives about smart cities, about putting cameras in, monitoring, doing all of these things. And living here, I was absolutely not aware of it. So I think it comes back down to what Tom said earlier, is the education. It's, I think, rolling something out, even though you might be talking to the end users, to the different departments, is a great thing. But I think you need to get the citizens involved and educate them. What are we doing? Why are we trying to do this? What's the purpose? What benefit is it going to get them? And how are we going to protect them? What are we going to collect? Now, California, for example, they got very, very strict privacy laws. You cannot randomly, even in a store, collect data and video record somebody without getting their approvals, and how long you can store it, all this. So I think it really gets down back to the cities, especially in the US, states and cities as well, because they all have their own data privacy requirements, and they're becoming more and more stringent. So I think smart cities, when they roll things out, they really need to take that into consideration, address the public, and let them know. Because overall, the cities, what I got from the event in Denver last week, is the cities are actually trying to, their whole goal is to keep citizens happy, to establish a safe environment from them, to get people to move from other states into the city, not leaving the city. So it's almost, they're trying to get customers. You have to keep the customers happy, and the citizens are the customers, and they need to be part of this whole approach.
Hey, we're collecting some great questions. I'm not sure we're going to have time for all of these. So there's a city in the UK called Oxford, and they're calling it a 15-minute city. So that's tied predominantly to park and ride. You kind of drive to a bus depot, and then the bus gets you to the city centre within 15 minutes. So the question is, that particular city's getting bad press. I guess there's some negative feedback from the population. How do you get around that? I would have a stab at that one. You know, culturally in the UK, and I suspect in the US, well, I know in the US, you know, having a car and the independence that brings is an integral part of the way of life of living in the UK and in the US. So how do you extol the benefits of doing something different when culturally it's been ingrained that, you know, you're 16, 17, you get a driver's license, get a car, and then you're a grown-up? And it's a thorny question, and it's quite ethereal. With any thoughts on that?
So I think it's going to be ease of use. I mean, tonight, for example, I'm going to into I live just outside of San Francisco, and you know, my whole MO is, how do I not drive into the city tonight? You know, I live about 15 minutes away. I'm like, how do I not drive into the city? So thankfully there's great ferry service, which makes life really easy. But I think that being inside cities, you know, with the way that we're curbing traffic flow and making it more either pedestrian first city or bicycle first city, these types of things, and the physical landscape of the city will influence how people choose to get about and get through those cities. So I think that's a big part of how shaping the transit modes that folks are going to be using, and moving them toward that 15-minute city.
100%. It's a cultural question with, you know, physical geography as part of the answer. But I think we come back to extolling the benefits and having those conversations. In the UK, these things tend to get kind of forced on the population. You know, Oxford and Cambridge combined, I think, just took the decision that they were going to be basically pedestrianised, and that's kind of what happened. So
I think one of the problems that hasn't been thought out, and it comes back to our thing about actually designing these things rather than implementing a half idea, and that is that there is parking at these location points where you can pick up the transport into the city. But before you get to that parking area, there is no information as to, is there actually anywhere left to park in that area? And this is something very simple that can be included in a smart city, which is an app which actually tells you where there's parking available. And you can actually book your parking before you actually get there. This will basically reduce that problem of not having anywhere to get to your parking. And it helps the city know how many buses they need to get to that parking area at any given time, therefore reducing the wait time for the bus or whatever other mechanism there is to get you into the city. So it can plan the actual transport infrastructure, it can plan the actual parking, and the operator, or the user, shall I say, gets to be able to plan his journey. So again, this is where the smart city, well thought out before you actually implement your environmentally friendly idea is very important. Don't get me wrong, Safe City can also be a great boon to the environment, and perhaps we'll touch on that later.
I don't think we're going to have time to go there, Tom. I'm afraid that's a whole topic all by itself. Perhaps we'll have another webinar. I don't know, but yeah, the technology for parking is not new. I mean, we built a casino in Las Vegas 12 years ago. Every parking space has a sensor, and if there's something in it, you see a red LED, and if there's not, you see a green one. So you can look down a row of spaces and say, "Oh, there's a spot down there. I'll go and park there." That's not difficult. One more question.
If I can add something to it, one thing on the cultural piece that is a little bit of a risk that I see, maybe for the next 10, 15 years, we have an aging population. There will be a lot of people, especially the older ones, that will be struggling with the technology, with all of these things that are coming, the autonomous cars. I mean, imagine your grandma has to go to a doctor, and now suddenly she will not be able to use the public transportation. She's going to have to get into use some kind of technology that will track her to get her the car right there where she needs it, when she needs it. And she's going to have to rely on a car that doesn't have a driver, or using technology that she is not familiar with. And I think that's one of the things that we will need to keep in mind as we go. There will be pushback. There will be so much that will be changing, where part of the society will not be comfortable with it.
And I think this again comes back to the planning, where you need to plan in a certain amount of education. What form that education takes can vary significantly. But there are ways to actually educate people about the technology that's coming and make it a much softer landing when it arrives. And I think that's very important. And I use this example because my mother-in-law, who's quite a bit older than me, is now getting educated in using some of these technologies. So it can be done, but you need to encourage that to get in, using the media that are available to us.
Yeah, that my dad's the same. He's 90. He was on a course recently on how to use the internet, because a lot of NHS services in the UK now are only accessible by the internet. You cannot pick the telephone up and call someone. So one last question. We've got 5 minutes, just a quick time check. A big thorny question. It's a great question. We're probably not going to have time to answer all of it, but with the EU's right to be forgotten, so this is a GDPR question, how will smart city teams approach the challenge of providing data profiles collected on the citizen and erasing or forgetting them on demand?
I would like to give it something. Honestly, most companies, and having done GDPR projects before and helping as part of my job getting companies to adhere to GDPR, I would say most companies don't even have the technology or the structure in place to have that right to be forgotten, to sort out the data of an individual from the current data, let alone the backup or the archive. So smart cities are going to have the same problem, but it's not just a problem that smart cities are going to have. Now, there is technology out there that can do that can correlate it, but this is going to be something that companies and smart cities equally will need to design in from the beginning. But right now, most companies don't even have it. Smart cities, and that comes back to the education in the US as well, that we're also struggling with, is everybody thinks, or most companies and cities and hotels even think GDPR is a European thing. It doesn't apply to us in the US. But guess what? A lot of people visit the US. Hotels, industry, all this is, even websites. If your website, unless you're blocking EU in general to access any website, you're going to be part of GDPR. And I think that comes back down. It has gotten a little bit better over the years, to understand that GDPR equally applies to the US. And we have to adhere to it, and we have to roll it out. And yes, it's a problem that companies have to do. And I don't think the smart cities, at least from what I've gathered during the conference, is they have a vision. They know they're going to have to address it, but I don't think they have completely addressed it just yet.
Yeah, data utilization and data collection is a massive problem right now. Just being able to identify what you have, like taking inventory alone of data is a big problem right now. So I think, you know, what we see companies do is anonymizing data using just metadata and extracting from there. But in some cases, that's not good enough. You can't, you know, for the application of the sensor or for whatever, there's, you know, facial information, there's very unique identifying information that's part of the set that would render the solution useless if stripped away. So you're right, this is balancing on that technology policy debate, which, Rob, we could do a whole other series on. So yeah.
And Jeff in the chat mentioned it here. It really also comes down to the vendors. I mean, obviously they're in the commercial space. They're going to put out technology out there. But if you're building a smart city, you need to understand all the regulatory requirements that apply to you. And then you have to select the technology and create the design accordingly. You have to ask the vendors, here are my requirements. How does your product help me to meet those requirements? That's going to have to be a question that you ask. Just like security is, you know, you have to not just about GDPR, how can I delete or track the data, but is it secure? How is it secured? What encryption are you using? Do you have, with the technology, do you have high availability in place? Because if I lose a piece of data, how quickly will I be able to then switch over to a different tool or to the secondary one to still get the analytics at the speed that I have in a regular environment, in a live production? So all of these things come really back down to having a conversation with the vendors and knowing from the beginning what are the requirements that you as a city have for facial recognition, for fingerprint recognition, for any kind of data that you're collecting, especially if it's personal and not just some metadata about up or downtime.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the top of the hour. I was going to offer you a minute each for closing remarks, but I think yeah, go on. You got 30 seconds each if you need it. Just to wrap up, please.
I'll just say quickly that yeah, I mean, I see application of cybersecurity into the data that is being collected and the IoT devices. The management of those things is one of my highest concerns right now, and so I'd like to see more of that hit the headlines of smart cities.
Awesome.
I just want to say there is a lot of potential. The future is going to go here. I think all of us, the ones that have worked on projects before, as well as the IT industry, together with the smart city managers, together with politicians, have to put our forces together and really drive this forward in a good and appropriate fashion to drive the technology, to drive the legislation, to drive the data privacy, and really have working teams to drive that forward properly. I would like to see a lot more of this.
Indeed.
I'd really like to see a lot of concentration on the environment in the smart city environment. We can do a lot with smart city to improve the environment for the citizen throughout the city. And to improve the environment itself as part of that project. So that concentration on the environment in the smart city concept, I think, is also a very important aspect that we mustn't forget. I love the technology, but I love the environment too.
Brilliant.
That just leaves me to thank the panel for your insight. We're getting some great feedback in the chat. Thanks to you guys. Thank you everyone for joining. We hope that was useful and insightful. Look, we've had a request already for a separate session on GDPR, which we'll be delighted to deal with in a week or two. So look out for an invitation for that. If anyone has any other ideas of discussions they'd like to see, you know, we know a lot of people and they're all very happy to join our panels. So just let us know. We can set those up. Otherwise, that's us. Thank you all again. Totally appreciated. For everyone that was here, you will receive a link to the video recording. I think we answered all of the questions, so there won't be a separate one of those. Or if you feel we didn't answer a question, then let us know. And if you have separate questions, then let us know separately, and we'll deal with those also. So thank you again, and make it a great day. Appreciate you.
Cheers. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Jim, good to see you, mate.